I am Trees Pels. I hold an endowed chair on parenting, socialization in the multi-ethnic city in VU University in Amsterdam. And my work is on child rearing, socialization within the family and other contexts that have a pedagogical responsibility for children, like schools or youth work. I also did some research within mosques on the pedagogy in some mosques in the Netherlands, and I also look into the relationship between families, migrant families, Muslim families, and other institutions, other contexts where children are socialized or raised. There are important social psychological factors that are part of the breeding ground for radicalization in young people. And I already said it's feeling isolated, perceiving threat for themselves or the collective they identify with, and also the seeking, the desperate seeking sometimes of meaning, of a sense of purpose, and of their own identity. And these are all factors related to personality development, and therefore it is, I think it's logical to look into child rearing and socialization. So that's what I'm going to do, based mainly on the recent Dutch research, part of which I have been involved in myself, and part of which has not yet been published. So I will talk about socialization and radicalization, the connection between the two, the risk and protective factors we see in these recent studies, and my focus will be on the family, but I also shortly will address other contexts like school, mosque, and civil society at large, a main topic of yesterday too. And of course I will end up with some clues for preventive action, which will be taken on further by Erica. One important risk factor or protective factor pertains to distrust or trust. What we see in several studies is that some parents in migrant families, Muslim families, either consciously or unconsciously teach their children to take a distance, to be distant from others, from other groups in society, or from mainstream culture, mainstream society, Western society. And sometimes this even goes further than distrust and goes into the teaching of distrust. And this we see in studies among Muslim youth, but also among right-wing Dutch youth. And on the other hand, we also see that parents that favor egalitarianism, so that teach their children consciously, more or less implicitly or explicitly, but teach them that everybody is equal, regardless of their background, ethnic, cultural, religious background. And this kind of attitude in parents, this kind of teaching, is positively related to egalitarianism in youth. So I think this is very important to know that, and what we also see is that parents usually do not realize how detrimental this attitude, this kind of parental message can be for the development of their children. That they may contribute to the breeding ground of radicalization. And what we see is that of course, there are several migrant generations, also in the Netherlands, like in other European countries. The first generation may have these messages for children, may have this attitude because of a fear of cultural estrangement, because they are afraid of moral decay of their children. So what we often see is that parents of the first generation give a double message. On the one hand, you have to make it in society, so do well in school. On the other hand, do not learn cultural messages in school or in other contexts. So this is a double message. For children, it's very hard to deal with. And also in some studies we see that youth report that parents, this is about studies in migrant families, that parents speak ill of the Dutch or of Dutch society, Dutch culture, Dutch way of raising children. So this has a cultural background, and what we see in younger generations, the cultural gap is closing very rapidly. Also, when we look into parenting, so parenting within second or third generation families is far more comparable to parenting in native Dutch families than when we look into the first generation. Of course, there's huge differences within groups and between groups, but this is a trend, a very clear trend. However, also these younger generations, part of parents, still continue or in their own way instill or inspire distance, distrust in their children. And that is not so much driven by a fear of cultural estrangement, but by experiences of discrimination, exclusion, and stigmatization. So this is, I think, a very important factor. The background differs, but the attitude in parents may still be rather polarizing, so to speak. And this is a quote of a Moroccan Dutch mother in one of the meetings that have been organized by the Dutch collaboration of Moroccan organizations who have initiated a helpline, a telephone helpline for parents, and also organize meetings to assist, to have a dialogue with parents, to assist and support parents. We ourselves also exclude people. She realized this in this meeting. She hadn't realized this before. That is very important. It's often you do not know what you do with your children. So we also exclude people. We are seeding hatred, which we pass on to our children. There are some important other factors. I think the second has been also told about by Stijn Siekeling and Misha de Winter yesterday. And to summarize it, for many parents, it's difficult how to react, how to deal with signs of radicalization, how to react when children come with questions or with utterances or behavior that are extreme or might seem extreme. The reaction is often looking away, downplaying what children do and say, or sanctioning their behavior, punitive, authoritarian reactions. And these, we know now from several researches, are risk factors when it comes to the breeding ground of radicalization. On the other hand, open communication, sensitively responding to children and their difficult matters they bring home with them, critically reflect on what children say and do is very important, and all are protective factors. Also actively guiding children when they experience injury, injustice, when they come home with stories about they are being scolded at, about their headscarf, etc. Moral support is also very, very, very important. Just listen. Just listen. And many parents, it's been said this morning too, do not feel certain about their own capacity as a parent. They think, well, I didn't have any education. I cannot do this. I am not able to help my child. Only a moral support only, and every parent can do that. Just listen. And you know, you can try and go to somebody else, to the neighbor, or to somebody in the mosque to talk about what happens at home. These are all buffers against radicalization. Sorry. Also, gender is an important factor that usually, or mainly in first generation families, boys and girls are raised differently, in that boys are let loose on a relatively young age, reaching adolescence. I talk in black and white, but this is to bring over this point. So they are more vulnerable from a young age to street and internet influences and socialization. So guiding boys also during their adolescence into the transmission to adulthood is very important in a complex society like the Netherlands and societies you come from. And rearing girls also is a factor. A recent study in Amsterdam among ultra-Orthodox Muslim girls, young women, I must say, showed that they often come from families with a lot of problems, multi-problematic situation, but also they complain about being very much restricted. So the boys and girls, it's a very different story. So they're restricted and they're not very, their parents are rather strict and do not give them a lot of opportunities to prepare themselves, for instance, for a future in society and not only in the home. So they lack this idea of how to spread their wings and being autonomous, and Islam, Orthodox Islam, may be a route out of this, because they can say, I'm not accountable to my father, my elder brother or aunt and uncle and my husband. I'm only accountable to Allah. I'm almost ending up by telling something about the school and the mosque as other important context for Muslim children. Many Muslim children attend mosque lessons, Quranic lessons, Arabic, where they also learn norms and values related to religion. And the picture from several researchers is about the same as that of the families. The same kind of uncertainty, pedagogical uncertainty, how to deal with questions, difficult remarks, extreme utterances of children. And the same phenomena of looking away, not giving children an ear, not interacting with them as a person, how difficult the behavior of that person might be. Also, punitive reactions, sanctioning what children say and do. We see that both in schools and in mosques. And as I told before, these are risk factors. And what both contexts also not often do, and I'm only referring to my own research now in the mosques and to more research in schools, is helping children, supporting children with bonding with the other, with each other. Sometimes teachers at schools talk to children in terms of you and we, you and we. So there are even people who are professional pedagogues may contribute to the polarization between groups without always realizing what they do. We see a vulnerable pedagogical civil society when it comes to migrant families. Because of a distance between those families and all kinds of institutions, the partnership between parents and schools is more fragile compared to native families and schools. And this and the same goes for other pedagogical contexts. So there is a bigger distance between families and all kinds of institutions, even justicial institutions where children might end up when things go very wrong. In all those domains we see this distance. And what also is maybe even worse, that of course there's a lot of informal and grassroots support for families, also for migrant families, but compared to the natives, the support that's being organized bottom up around native families, also here the distance is bigger. The distance between voluntary work, grassroots work, supporting families and formal services is far wider than with native families. So instead of working together, of cooperating in supporting our children, there is sometimes a distance and sometimes even competition, or worse, also polarization. So I think we have to invest in that a lot. To come to the recommendations, what we need is support for parents, and I would like to say also for fathers, because the father-son relationship when in the context of radicalization is very important. And father involvement is a big issue, because there's less father involvement than we would like. Most of our services only are directed at mothers. Awareness raising in communities, because many parents do not know that they instill in their children this feeling of distance and distrust. And when they do know this, they do not realize that they may contribute to the breeding ground of radicalization. And also we need to invest more in strengthening the pedagogical civil societies around migrant families, and that means competence training, but also building partnerships. This was what I had to say, and I give the floor to Erica.